Good Monday morning, my dear brother or sister. I hope that this finds you well, getting ready to start a wonderful week. But most of all, of course, I hope you're living your very best life in Jesus Christ. Sometimes I get concerned about things, and of late I seem to be concerned about Christians that are, well, how do I put this nicely? Grumpy. Or even worse, not very polite. I think it's very important that we as Christians are sure that we are kind and tenderhearted and loving to others daily, and most of that comes through our speech. And even though for a lot of us this doesn't come naturally, we are supposed to put on the mind and mannerisms of Christ. Lately, I've been seeming to run across a whole bunch of, well, shall we say, seasoned citizens that seem to take pride in their bluntness. They kind of have this, well, take it or leave it kind of attitude, and I find that off-putting. I have quite a few friends who, as they've gotten older, have begun to be, well, horribly blunt to others, and like I said, they take great pride in speaking their mind. They say, we're going to let the chips fall where they may. I told this story about this time last year. I'm going to repeat it about a dear friend of mine who I kind of, well, to be honest with you, he hasn't called me back because I think I hurt his feelings. See, he's a friend, and he's a good friend, but he's an elder in his church. And he told me this story about his neighbor who, they got into a conflict, and he basically describes the guy as a sinner, and he talks about their confrontation. He says he let him have them with both barrels. And so I listened as he described his lambasting of this younger man and how that young man needed to get his life right with Jesus. Well, I have no doubt he's correct. But when he was finished, I asked him a question. I said, do you really think the example that you set for him made him more or less receptive to giving his life to Christ? And he got more than a little bit angry with me. There was a silence on the phone. And then he said angrily, well, who are you to criticize me? I said, well, the thing is, the scripture tells us that your speech is always supposed to be not necessarily pleasant, but it's, according to Apostle Paul, gracious, seasoned with salt, that you may know how you ought to answer each person. The thing is, I asked him then after that, I said, how would you have reacted? And I know the answer to this because we grew up together. How would you have reacted if you were lost and floundering in this horrible world, and if somebody who was a Christian had behaved the way you did? I told him, I said, look, man, I know your history. I said, you're like me. You didn't become a Christian by being yelled at and belittled. And I doubt this other guy will either. Well, he, frankly, he hung up on me, and even though I've tried to contact him a couple of times since then, he just doesn't want to talk to me, I suppose. But I'm not surprised. If there's one criticism that we hear out in the world against believers, it's that we lack compassion. We're abrasive and judgmental more than thoughtful, tactful, compassionate, and, well, let's use the word tolerant. The thing is, if we're not careful, we tend to use other people rather than love them. I hate to say that, but isn't that true? The thing is, we try to change them and then help them later rather than accept who they are now. There's no wonder Christians are called dry, boring, and lifeless. And yet, our speech is supposed to be something that's attractive. The New Testament that tells us that it becomes clear that the freedom of the gospel should make Christians the most engaging people on the planet. We have the most to tell. The Greek words that are used in Paul's speech, for example, that I just talked about, was the words speech, gracious, and salt, which are in the ancient Greek logos, charis, and holos, are used together when you combine them in that way in all first century literature to mean words that are gracious and attractive, winsome, even witty, and that they're spoken in a humble manner. In other words, Paul wants us to present the gospel to the outside world in a manner that captures the gospel's excitement and that is able to answer the unbelievers' legitimate questions and deal with them kindly, lovingly, even when, to be honest with you, folks are unlovable. And Paul uses this example when he talks about how he approached the church of Thessalonica. In 1 Thessalonians 2:7, he says, "But we proved to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children. Having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also of our own lives, because you have become very dear to us." See, I think gracious speech and politeness comes from the idea that you have been changed through Christ and you are full of His grace, which you then show others. Paul goes on and says, "So are your witnesses, and so is God, how devoutly and uprightly and blamelessly we behave toward you believers, just as you know how we were exhorting and encouraging and imploring each one of us as a father would his own children." And even Peter, who was known to be a bit rash, talks about gentle speech. I mean, even though we picture Paul as a firebrand for the Lord, and it was obvious that he displayed a gracious, tolerant spirit. I know it's hard to picture this, but Paul is described as approachable and even tender. He says he cares for others as a nursing mother. He has compassion. I mean, this was a very capable, brilliant man who I'm sure was way above everybody else he had to deal with. But he made his priority being gracious, compassionate, polite, loving toward others. It's taken me a long time to understand that people don't need to be lectured, belittled, nor berated. And we're certainly not being valid representatives of Christ when we do this, no matter what might be the provocation. We live in a world that's hungry and hurting, and it longs for and deserves the message of truth. But it doesn't need it to be, people don't need to be smacked in the head with it. It needs to be attractive, gentle, and come in, well, I guess the only words I have for it is gracious wrappings. The thing is, we need to be positive affirmation type people, rather than be the people known for negative nitpicking. I mean, Peter made it clear people are far more important than rigid rules and demanding expectations. The people that you're going to meet today, a lot of them who are not serving Christ, are hurting humans who need truth, presented in a gentle, gracious manner. Look, I would love to get back with my old friend. And what I said, I didn't say unkindly, but the truth is that we need to be considered in our daily speech. We need to make sure that our actions fit our love. And when we talk about being gracious, let us be gracious in the way of Christ. We need to be sacrificial. We need to be loving. And we need to represent Christ to a very, very lost and dying world. I hope you have a wonderful day today. I hope you discover this grace in you and are willing to share it with others. Remember, I'm here if you need me, and I certainly love you all. Have a fantastic week.